Thank you guys for coming. Today we're going to talk about commercial real estate investors. As you all know, my name is Audra Forney. I'm a life and business strategist. My background is in hospitality, and I am the partner of a group that we own and manage a few commercial real estate properties. And so I'm using that experience to kind of give you guys a background on commercial property investing. So there's different types of commercial property that you can look at for investment purposes. It could be a multifamily residential unit, be a quad or a duplex or an apartment complex. As a commercial investor, you can also invest in single family residences in order to rent them out. It could be office space, industrial or warehouse, where some of my experience comes from, retail shops, recreation, land that you wish to develop, net leases, or potentially agricultural investments that you could not continue to use as agricultural investments or further develop along the line into different kinds of developments. So in commercial property investing, you can buy, sell, lease, develop, redevelop, make improvements, or upgrade that property. So when you go to purchase your commercial property, you really want to determine what is the purpose of that investment. And when you're calculating your return, you really have to take these things into consideration. And it's best to understand and know before you go into your commercial property investments what you want to use it for, how long you want to hold it. Are you looking for an increase in the value, or are you looking for a long-term income stream from the property? So investment considerations, like I said, return on investment. Are you looking to get cash out? Are you looking to refinance later? Are you looking for the value of that property to increase over a certain period of time? And do you have a time frame that you really want to work with? Properties don't often depreciate, but they do depreciate. As we know, in 2008, you can buy a piece of property at a certain value. If something should happen to the market and the value of that property decreases, what is the ramification on your investment should that happen? As well as the amortization of a mortgage. If you intend on purchasing it through a bank and getting a loan, how much is the cost of that loan going to impact your investment in the property? Also, is it a passive income, or is it something that you're going to have to manage actively? There are different types of property investments that can be passive as well as active. If you intend on having 7 single-family homes that you're going to rent out, how much time, effort, and energy is it going to take you to manage that? And does that impact the cash flow that's happening? Also, you need to consider the different types of leases, the different types of tenants. If it's a single-family home, you may have a family or a student. If it's an office building, you may have businesses in that property, and how does that impact your leases and the quality of management that you're going to have to provide to it. You're also going to have to consider your down payment. If it's a commercial loan, commercial loans are generally different than single-family residential homes when it comes to making your down payment. And the structure of that loan is generally quite different than a standard commercial residential loan. And that impacts how much down payment you're going to need when you purchase that property. Additionally, it's very important to get in touch with a commercial banker to understand the different financing and leverage options that are out there and available to you when you go to purchase commercial real estate. You can even come into situations where you might be offered owner financing, which is a whole nother type of mortgage and note on a property. When it comes to commercial property, and if you have tenants, then there's always the option that you're going to have a vacancy, which means that you're going to have to carry the cost of that property even though you don't have an income stream on it. So it's very important to also take into consideration, do you have the funds available to you to cover yourself if you should have vacancies? You will still have to pay your mortgage, you will still have to pay the upkeep on the property. And how much is that going to cost you should you have a vacancy in the property? Additionally, there are different types of permitting and zoning when it comes to commercial property. So you'll need to figure out what the intended use of that property is and if it is zoned and permitted properly. Please take these into consideration before purchasing your property and when you do your research. So when you're out looking for a piece of commercial property, there are some physical features that you're going to have to take into consideration. Most importantly, location. If you're purchasing an office building, is it in a good traffic flow place that your potential tenants would be attracted to it? If it's a retail space, also, is it in a good location that would be beneficial to the research type of client, retail clientele that you want to put into that piece of property? Is it of sound construction? Always have your properties inspected so that you know that it is of sound construction and there aren't any major issues that you will have to repair and costs that you will have to spend prior to your being able to make it a usable piece of property for someone else. Is it in good condition? Does it have utilities, electric, sewer, water? These are also things that you need to take into consideration if you're buying land and you want to build on that land. If you want to develop it, you'll have to consider its use. Does it have electric? Does it have sewer? Will you have to put in additional costs to make those things available when you do your building? Is there public transportation close? This can be very important if you're considering a retail location. Will mass transit get people to the locations to be beneficial to your end user? And is there parking available? If there's not currently parking and you have to put in a parking lot, please make sure that you research the certain number of spaces that you have to have for the certain number of people that are going to be using that location, as well as disabled parking places per square feet or per size of your lot. Okay, so let's say that you've found a piece of property and you're interested in purchasing it. You're going to need a team of people to help you do this. There are different roles for the different people in your team. You'll need an attorney to make sure that your contracts are appropriate and in adherence with the law. You'll need a real estate broker to broker your transaction. It's much more beneficial to hire a broker or agent because that person can be your best interest or represent your best interest in the transaction. They're also much more familiar with the law and the statutes that are required when you're purchasing property. Your mortgage broker will help you design and outline what your mortgage would be on the property, as well as give you insights in different price ranges so that you can make sure that you have the money available to you to be able to close, as well as help you estimate those vacancy costs or those rebuilding costs and renovation costs and carrying costs. Your lender, such as your commercial broker or your commercial lending banker, is there to help you make sure that you have all of your documentation together in order to close in a timely way and to troubleshoot any challenges that may come up along the way. Your title agent is the person that researches the title of the property to make sure that you're receiving that property clear of any liens or in cloudy title issues. They do all the background research to make sure that the person that's selling the property actually has the right to sell it to you full and clear. Your insurance agent is there to make sure that you have adequate insurance coverage so that should any liability happen, either during the closing, after the closing, or once you now have tenants, that you're covered and that your building or structure is covered in order to protect you in case of an emergency. Environmental consultants and testing are important, especially when it comes to purchasing land or purchasing older buildings, to make sure that the environment has not been impacted, that you don't have any buried tanks, that you're not going to be liable down the road for something that you were unaware of. Engineering inspection is needed if you're building a building or if you have an older building to make sure that it is structurally sound and everything is good to go as far as your structure, whether you're in the building process or you're buying something that already exists. Oftentimes you may have other consultants on hand if you're buying or building something very specific. So make sure that you research and have professionals that have experience, credentials, and background so that they can give you the best advice possible. You'll always want to do an appraisal on any structure that you purchase. When it comes to commercial appraisals, there are a few key differences. Commercial appraisals take considerably longer, up to 4 weeks. They're also a bit more expensive because there's a lot more background that has to go into conducting an appraisal when it comes to commercial property. They really look at income and cash flow as well as best use of the space and land. So they'll be considerably more expensive. They're also much more extensive. They're longer, more pages, more comparisons, more insight into what that property has been used for, can be used for, and is valued at. So they really try to find properties that are unique and comparable to the one that you are purchasing, and which limits those comparables. And they generally have a larger scope as far as distance from the subject property, simply because they're trying to find something that's much more similar to get a better, more accurate appraisal. Oftentimes they will often include demographics and market data within that appraisal because they're comparing like businesses or like structures. Some examples of commercial property would include retail locations, bed and breakfast, apartment complexes, light industrial use, even mobile homes, self-storage, mixed-use properties, condos and hotels, and even truck stops. So some investment considerations, we talked about return on investment. That is the amount of money you purchase a property for versus how much you intend to make over a period of time. What is your return on that initial investment? Another issue would be risk tolerance. How risky is this commercial investment? And the importance of developing a bargaining strategy early in the process. Often commercial investment projects, there's a bit more of a bargaining tool, since we're considering not just the value of the property, but the potential income stream off of that property. Whereas with a residential home, generally the market sets the price, and your small bit of negotiation happens between you and the single family dweller. And it can be a bit more of an emotional exchange in a single family home because that's their home, where a commercial investment is a business transaction more so than an emotional transaction. So you have a little bit more of a bargaining situation happening there. Okay, so in assembling and managing your team of your professionals, we did talk about the different roles within a commercial transaction. Some key things to consider: getting the right person for the job. As I talked about, expertise, knowledge, experience, reputation, making sure that particular professional is professional in their field. Do they have a good relationship with others? Do others speak kindly or positively about them? It helps you give a sense of trust and understanding if you choose a person for that role that you believe in and that you can trust. Understanding the roles of your professionals, and this goes farther than just the role title. This is about understanding what their part of the pie is, so that you can trust that person to make those decisions and to give you that advice. Their responsiveness and cost control. in any transaction, you have to consider the cost of each part. So that is a weight between trust and cost. It's not always best to choose the cheapest person if you believe that another person would be a better fit for that role. So you really have to weigh that decision when you're setting out to make this commercial investment. Okay, so a typical sale of a commercial investment property, the timeline is, so you get your team together, you locate your property, and you confirm that the property interests are adequately described in the contract and included in the, to the extent applicable. So, real properly, it needs a description of not only just the land, the improvements, the actual building, fixtures, what comes with it, what is excluded, personal property such as if you're buying a printing press plant, are the printers included? And if they are not included, then they need to be excluded, and you need to know what's coming with the property and what's not coming with the property. The general rule of thumb is that if it's screwed into the wall and attached to the building, then it generally comes with the building. So please make sure that you identify or have the seller identify anything that should be excluded from the sale clearly, so that you know when it comes to closing, and you also know how to value that piece of property, which includes those things. So when you purchase your commercial investment property, do pay attention to whether there's currently a lease or not. Does the commercial investment come with a tenant? And if that tenant comes with the purchase, make sure you have copies of all of those leases, and you know what your obligation is going to be after you take ownership of that property. Any leases and agreements in relation to tenants and businesses within that location. Other contracts or service contracts that may come with, you may inherit with that property. And permits, approvals, licenses, warranties, guarantees. Part of the job of the title agent is to make sure that if they did do improvements, that everything was permitted properly. So in your review of your contract before closing, make sure that you understand whether those improvements, additions, or any kind of structures on the property have been permitted or not, and you can make a knowledgeable, educated decision as to whether it's in the best interest to assume that property, considering any permitting issues that might come with it. There are certain closing contingencies that may arrive. If you don't have an attorney to review your commercial deals, you may have financing contingencies, you may have approval contingencies, and representation and warranty contingencies. You would want to review these with both your lender and your title agent and your attorney. Will those contingencies negatively affect the purchase of the property or the closing or the possibility of closing? Being ahead of the game really helps you prevent any delays in your closing or loss of funds. So there's title considerations to be considered. A marketable title. It's quoted as good and marketable title, insurable by a reputable title insurance company at regular rates, and subject only to expectations to title that will not impair buyers' intended operations to the property. A marketable title, if you have a marketable title, it's easier and allows you to resell the property. You really want to make sure that you have clear title to the property in the event that you would like to sell it in the future. So this goes back to what is your intended purpose of the property, and having a marketable title protects you should your intended purpose of the property be to sell it at a later date. I would always assume that you would want to sell the property at some point, even if you don't necessarily think that at the moment. There should be an opportunity that arises later down the line where you may want to sell that property. And without a marketable title, it's much more difficult. So on the part of your title company, they will help you go through the process of getting clear title to the property for which you're purchasing. In your title review, you raise the right to title objections. If anything should pop up and there may be a cloud on the title, or they didn't have a direct deed transference sometime in the past, you always have the opportunity to object. So you should retain that opportunity to object when you put it in your contract to purchase. A cloud on the title can sometimes be not a difficult thing to rectify, but sometimes it can be quite laborious and include court time and a judge providing you with clear title after, some time of review and fact checking. So it's very important to make sure that you can receive clear title to your property so that it is yours to sell at a future date should you decide to do that. In your title review, you'll write you want to retain the right to terminate should those objections not be able to be rectified or eliminated. And it includes judgment searches. We come into this quite frequently now with so many foreclosures that were then allowed to be sold after the issuance of a judgment, which cleared the title. So that is part of your title review process, and it's not uncommon. So just keep an eye out for it and be educated. So due diligence is your right to research, basically, and it's your right and your obligation to do as much research or hire someone to do as much research as humanly possible in order to secure your purchase free and clear. So you have the right to investigate all aspects of the property, which includes physical eye on it and research into the property's title and lineage. Types of due diligence would be the property's actual condition, its approvals and permitting on any structural changes or additions to the property or improvements, your review of its environmental impact, and any leases that come with the property when you take ownership, those tenants that we were talking about. So you have a right to review all of those leases prior to purchase. And it goes back to your team, hiring the right professionals to do the due diligence, whether it be property inspectors, appraisals, title company, hire due diligence. And the lender also has a stake in that due diligence because it's their responsibility to lend safely. And so the impact of not only the condition, but the permits and environmental and lease review is also part of their process to make sure that they're lending safely on secure property. So don't be afraid when they ask you, we would like a review of all of the paperwork. It's their job. Make sure all of your necessary representations and warranties are obtained. The authority, the physical condition, again, the leases, the title issues, that it complies with the laws, the environmental matters, any litigation or anti-terrorist laws. They take all of that into consideration when you're reviewing the property and their warranties. So you have some pre-closing obligations when it comes to closing on your commercial investment. The seller is obligated to deliver the property in broom clean condition. So broom clean condition means that they have removed all of their personal property and it is in an acceptable state to be transferred. Unless you're purchasing property and you're buying it as is with, alleviating the seller from having to clean it up and take away the trash, generally it's accepted that it should be in room condition, which means it should be ready for you to take ownership. The seller is also obligated to correct code or other violations. Should a structure be added to the building that was not permitted or it's not up to code, unless you're purchasing it as is, the seller is generally obligated to rectify those permit violations. And the seller has obligations under the existing leases. So let's say that you have a tenant that's moving out prior to the buyer purchasing that piece of property, then the seller has to fulfill all of his obligations under the lease of that tenant, because that tenant is in the establishment during their ownership. So if it's a security deposit that has to be returned, then that would be the seller's obligation under the existing lease. So make sure that you review all of the current leases and that the seller is performing any and all obligations that they must fulfill during that lease. So then you've done all of your pre-closing, you've done all of your due diligence, your team has done its job, the seller has fulfilled their obligations, and now it's time to close. So closing is fairly easy if all of the aforementioned responsibilities have been carried out appropriately. You pick a time, a date, and a place. You go through the mechanics of closing, which is generally the title company's responsibility to provide you with a closing statement so that everybody knows how much money they have to bring to the table on the day of closing. And you fulfill any time is of the essence issues. If there's any timely responsibilities that need to be performed prior to closing, then you go ahead and you accomplish those duties and get everything ready to close. Within your closing statement can be certain closing adjustments. So real estate taxes are paid proportionally to the amount of time you will own the property this year and the amount of time the seller owns the property this year. So it's prorated on both sides. Any assessments that have been granted in regards to, let's say you have a homeowners association and they've levied an assessment, it will need to be decided whose responsibility the next assessment will lay upon, and those can sometimes be prorated and sometimes assigned depending upon who takes responsibility for the assessments. Any rents, whether it be a portion of a month or a portion of a quarter or a portion of a year, it will determine who is to be responsible or accept those rents. Association fees, utilities, sewer, water charges, payment under service of contract or any other agreements that are standing prior to the transfer of the property, and realty transfer taxes or any such taxes that might be applicable to that commercial property. So that's a short and sweet of commercial property investing. It's very important for you to have the right team around you to perform the functions and obligations for you as a buyer or as a seller. And for you to definitely do your due diligence on your piece of property after you've determined exactly what you want the property to function for. Have an understanding in your mind and make a decision when you look at a piece of property, what you want to do with it, so that when it comes time to negotiating with the seller, talking to your appraisals and your title companies about what the function of that property is going to be, so that you're utilizing it in the best way to create an income stream or investment for yourself. Make sure that you walk around, or you have someone that you trust that can walk around the property so that you get a very good understanding of the condition. And do further research on what that property is intended to do and how much of an income stream you're expecting to receive from it, and any carrying costs you're going to have by owning it. And definitely talk to a very good lender, a commercial lender, so that you can develop a relationship with that person, and they can help guide you in the process of commercial property investing. My name is Audra, and I hope you enjoyed commercial property investing, and have a wonderful day.